What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 3. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for this week's NFL slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, NFL Week 3. Let's take a look at the quarterback position. So the stud that I like on the slate the most is Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills playing the Miami Dolphins, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the third most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Josh Allen has averaged 33.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.5 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 10% owned, projected at 26 fantasy points here in Week 3. He's $8,200 DraftKings salary, $800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 53 points scored in this game, with the Buffalo Bills favored by 5.5. So Josh Allen has scored 33 and 34 fantasy points in his last two games, off of 1 and 10 rush attempts. So he's got a great matchup in a high-scoring game. So I like Josh Allen here versus the Miami Dolphins. Another quarterback that I like is Kyler Murray from the Arizona Cardinals playing the LA Rams, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Kyler Murray has averaged 23.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5 rush attempts per game. He's only going to be about 3% owned, projected at 21.6 fantasy points here in Week 3. He's $7,300 DraftKings salary, $500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game, with the Cardinals trailing by 3.5. So Kyler Murray has scored 27 and 21 fantasy points in the last two games. He got 5 rush attempts in each of those games. So I like Kyler Murray here versus the LA Rams. Now I also like Jalen Hurts. I think Patrick Mahomes could have a good day. I think Matthew Stafford is in a fantastic spot here versus the Cardinals. But the one quarterback that sticks out to me, if you want to save some salary, he's in a fantastic matchup. Take a look at Kirk Cousins from the Minnesota Vikings playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 3rd worst defense overall. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins has averaged 15.5 fantasy points per game on the season, only getting an average of 1 rush attempt per game. He's going to be about 9% owned, projected at 21.4 fantasy points here in Week 3. He's only $6,700 DraftKings salary, $900 more on FanDuel. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 52.5 points scored in this game, with the Minnesota Vikings favored by 6. So Kirk Cousins, he scored 12 and 19 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. But now he's got a fantastic matchup. He's got Dalvin Cook coming back, which should open up those wide receivers. So I like Kirk Cousins here versus the Detroit Lions. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So the stud on the slate that I like is Joe Mixon from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the New York Jets, who have the 8th worst defense overall. They give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Joe Mixon has averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 23 rush attempts per game and 6.5 pass targets per game. So he's getting a ton of volume. He's been on the field for 74% of the snaps, gonna be about 17% owned, projected at 18 fantasy points here in week 3. He's 7,600 DraftKings salary, 600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45 points scored in this game, with the Bengals favored by 6. So Joe Mixon has scored 11 and 22 fantasy points in the last 2 games, up of 19 and 27 rush attempts, on top of 4 and 9 pass targets. So just a ton of volume, averaging almost 30 touches per game. Fantastic matchup. This one could easily turn into a running game script if the Bengals get a lead on the New York Jets. So I like Joe Mixon here versus the New York Jets. Okay guys, it's time to announce the winner of our $25 weekly PayPal giveaway, and the winner is Flame Janes. Flame Janes, congratulations. You are the winner of this week's $25 PayPal giveaway. Please reply to our comment to collect your prize.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
I also like Antonio Gibson from the Washington Commanders playing the Philadelphia Eagles, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Antonio Gibson has averaged 16.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 14 rush attempts per game and 6 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 7% owned, projected at 14.1 fantasy points here in week 3. He's 6,400 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Commanders trailing by 6.5. So Antonio Gibson has scored 12 and 20 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks, off of 14 and 14 rush attempts, on top of 4 and 8 pass targets, so averaging 20 touches per game on the season. He's got a great matchup here, and even if the Washington Commanders do fall behind, he's still involved in the passing game, so he should still be able to produce those fantasy points. So I like Antonio Gibson here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, if you want to save some salary at the running back position, take a look at David Montgomery from the Chicago Bears playing the Houston Texans, who have the 9th worst defense overall. They give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. David Montgomery has averaged 13.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 16 rush attempts per game and 3 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 72% of the snaps. He's going to be about 17% owned, projected at 15.4 fantasy points here in week 3. He's only 5,900 DraftKings salary, 1,200 more on FanDuel. Now, Vegas thinks there's going to be 39 points scored in this game, with the Chicago Bears favored by 3. David Montgomery has scored 19 and 8 fantasy fantasy points in the last 2 games, off of 15 and 17 rush attempts, on top of 2 and 4 pass targets. So although Vegas does think this is going to be a low-scoring game, I do think this is going to be a running game script. The Houston Texans are not very good versus the run, and you're going to save some salary with this pick. I think David Montgomery can put up 20-plus fantasy points in this matchup, so I like David Montgomery here versus the Houston Texans. Okay, moving on to the wide receiver position. This guy is just coming back from injury. He sat out last week. He had a fantastic week 1. So take a look at Michael Pittman Jr. from the Indianapolis Colts playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have the 7th worst defense overall. They give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Michael Pittman Jr. scored 30 fantasy points in week 1 off of 13 rush attempts. He's going to be about 8% owned, projected at 16.2 fantasy points here in week 3. He's $6,900 DraftKings salary, $500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Indianapolis Colts trailing by 5.5. So I like this pick because I could see this being a passing game script as the Kansas City Chiefs take the lead early in this game and the Colts playing from behind. So I think Michael Pittman Jr. could get a ton of pass targets in this one, just like he did in week 1, and it's a good matchup. So I like Michael Pittman Jr. here versus the Kansas City Chiefs.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, if you want to save some salary at the wide receiver position, take a look at Adam Thielen from the Minnesota Vikings playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 3rd worst defense overall. They give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Adam Thielen has averaged 7.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.5 pass targets per game. I like this pick because he's been on the field for 96% of the snaps, only going to be about 5% owned, projected at 12.4 fantasy points here in week 3. He's $5,900 DraftKings salary, $100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 52.5 points scored in this game, with the Vikings favored by 6. So Adam Thielen has scored 9 and 7 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 7 and 4 pass targets. Now I know Justin Jefferson has been the guy, the explosive player so far this season, but Adam Thielen, he can be explosive as well. He's just way underpriced here, way under-owned. This guy's going to end up being 7,000 plus DFS salary in no time, and he's sitting at 5,900 right now. So I think this is a good buy low opportunity for a player in a high-scoring game, and it's a fantastic matchup. So I like Adam Thielen here versus the Detroit Lions. Now I also like Brandon Cooks from the Houston Texans playing the Chicago Bears, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing wide receivers. Brandon Cooks has averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11 pass targets per game.
He's been on the field for 89% of the snaps. He's going to be about 14% owned, projected at 14.3 fantasy points here in week 3. He's 5,800 DraftKings salary, 800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 39 points scored in this game, with the Texans trailing by 3. So Brandon Cooks has scored 9 and 15 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 10 and 12 pass targets. So I like that consistent volume over 10 targets a game. His salary is still pretty low. Even though this is a low scoring game, or Vegas thinks this is going to be a low scoring game, I think he should get plenty of opportunity in this one. So I like Brandon Cooks here versus the Chicago Bears. Now, of course, guys, I also like Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson. Those are some other studs that I think are in great spots here this week. But let's move on to the tight end position. So I've been saying this guy's name all week, and actually I've been picking this guy since week 1, and I'm going to pick him again. I like Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 3rd worst defense overall. Although they've been pretty good versus the tight end position, Darren Waller has averaged 14.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7 pass targets per game. He's only going to be about 5% owned, projected at 13.1 fantasy points here in week 3. He's 5,800 DraftKings salary, 600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45.5 points scored in this game, with the Raiders favored by 2. So Darren Waller has scored 17 and 12 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 8 and 6 pass targets. I think his salary is still super low for his upside. Ownership is still low. So I like Darren Waller here versus the Tennessee Titans. Okay, another tight end that I like is Tyler Higbee from the LA Rams playing the Arizona Cardinals, who have the absolute worst defense overall. They give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Tyler Higbee has averaged 11.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 10 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 96% of the snaps, gonna be about 15% owned, projected at 10.7 fantasy points here in week 3. He's only 4,500 DraftKings salary, 1,200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game, with the Rams favored by 3.5. Now, Tyler Higbee has scored 14 and 9 fantasy points in the last 2 games, off of 9 and 11 pass targets. So I love that volume. Fantastic matchup. Salary is still low, so I like Tyler Higbee here versus the Arizona Cardinals. Now I also like Dallas Goedert from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Washington Commanders, who have the 4th worst defense overall. Although they've been pretty good versus opposing tight ends, Dallas Goedert has averaged 11.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 88% of the snaps, gonna be about 7% owned, projected at 11.2 fantasy points here in week 3. He's 4,700 DraftKings salary, 800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Eagles favored by 6.5. So Dallas Goedert has scored 13 and 9 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 6 and 4 pass targets. So I like Dallas Goedert here versus the Washington Commanders.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com.
You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.